love technology.
Hi, Facebook Bookbinder members. I hope we have some of you watching, and if not, you'll catch it later. Today's a special day where we have Lori Raupe coming to visit us, and she's going to share with us from her heart what God has given her in expertise regarding writing and publishing. And so we're very excited to have her. And I want to introduce you by telling you a little bit about her. Lori Raupe began following Christ as her Savior and in the 1970s after a campus life meeting. Although Lori worked throughout her life, her most cherished job is being a mom. Yeah. Having faced adversity and profound loss, Lori has found her God-given purpose. That's so important.
It is.
Fulfilling our God-given purpose, which brings her immense joy, she says. Her life continues to inspire others, spreading a message of hope and resilience that is deeply rooted in her faith. Her award-winning book, Create Butterfly Moments, Become the Person You Were Meant to Be, was written to honor her daughter, Jennifer. It reached #1 bestseller status in 8 countries. 8 countries, that's wonderful. And for this, she gives God the glory. Amen. Lori does more than tell stories. As a publisher, she helps others share God's love. As a certified member of the John Maxwell team, Lori uses her voice to touch hearts at home and globally. Wow. The highlight of these trips was leading John's transformational process for the Senate in Costa Rica. Wow. Her unwavering dedication has made her a true leader and a difference maker. She often says, God has been so faithful, even in the darkest times. He's been there. I want to introduce to you now Lori Raupe. Welcome, Lori. Let's give her a hand.
I clapped not for me, but for God. You know, it's funny how you walk through your life, and as you look back, you can say, oh my goodness, his hand was there. His hand was there and there and there and there. And it's like all of a sudden you end up where I am today, and you realize just how faithful God is and just how he has been there, and like all the good times and even the bad, you know, it just, he meets you where you need to be met. And that's such a beautiful thing to be able to say, and also to be able to share knowledge like today is really important. And I do speak at different events. I was in Niagara Falls, Canada last week, which is why I'm a little kind of sluggish. I'm still trying to figure out time zone. And then I rushed to my daughter's house over the weekend, just this weekend, and came back yesterday for my youngest granddaughter's concert. She's plays the violin and is doing really well. She's even starting to be a conductor, which is so exciting. Only in the homeschool environment do you get opportunities like this to really serve and use your gifts. So it's a beautiful thing for me to be able to be a part of their lives, and also to see them flourishing in their own faith. So it's really fun. So today, originally I was thinking the best thing I could do to serve you would be to even go back to some of the basics of the things that I've learned in my own journey of not only just my own book journey, but also publishing other people's books. I have published, I don't know for sure how many, I must be close to 50 or 60 where I helped from start to finish. I do a lot of consultation work where I come in sometimes even at the 11th hour or 12th hour, and people will want to know, well, what do I do now, or how do I get my book into the marketplace, things like that. So I do consultant work along the way. Sometimes people will hire me to review their books and give them feedback, and so I'm happy to do all these different pieces because I operate my business much in the way that I operate my life, which is, I believe if God is giving me that nudge to work with somebody, I'll work with them. And if not, I sometimes will just say, I'm just not sure I could help you. And that's important to me because I don't want to produce books that I believe will not serve in a way that is a good way to serve in the world. And so I am selective with what I do and how I help people. So originally I was just going to kind of start at the basics, and then I got to thinking, yesterday or actually the day before Friday, I was driving to my daughter's house, and all of a sudden I had this impression that I should share the mistakes people make, and it really kind of ties together. So if you know the beginning of kind of how to work on your whole book project, and you understand some of the mistakes that I see people making, that it really ties together. So I thought I hope this serves you with where you are today in your journey, and I will touch a little bit all along the way. So the one thing, I thought I would share a little bit about my own book journey. I was at John Maxwell's church many years ago. He was my pastor, and John is a global leadership expert and was once a pastor. And he discovered that his own books on the topic of leadership were really, his publisher came to him and said, I don't know if you know this, but your books on leadership, they were really directed to church leaders, were selling more in the secular world than they were they were selling in the church leadership world too, but they were kind of taking the world by fire in the secular world. And so that sort of surprised him, and he made a big decision to not leave the church, but not be our senior pastor any longer, and to go into the secular world teaching leadership, because he felt, and I think a lot of people felt, that his impact would be much greater for God. So I've seen and watched how he's done this unfold throughout my life in watching him. He was my pastor for 13 years, highly impacted my life. I've followed him ever since. I've learned all of his leadership principles that I applied in my career. And I've watched and learned from some of the things that he's done. And also he teaches has taught I think it was a 2-day book writing workshop that I attended multiple times. And I thought, I could share some of the insights that I've learned, not only watching him, but myself too. So while I was going to that church, on the way to church one morning, I used to say, I should write a book because no one would believe my life. And I said it kind of tongue-in-cheek because, it's like, I just felt like, familiar. Yeah, does it? Oh, funny. Well, it was true then, and sometimes I just think maybe I shouldn't have said that so many times, because I had a lot more to write about it since then. And it's funny because back then, so I'm saying this on the way to church, and at the time I had 2 young daughters and a husband that really was struggling with mental health. And I felt like my world was going to come unhinged in any moment. And so the only thing I could think of was to insert humor into my life. And I really thought I could be the next Irma Bombeck. I don't know if you know who. Do you know who Irma Bombeck is?
Yes.
Do you have a tie to her somehow? Or?
No. I just I recognize the name. And she's a real humorous writer, right?
Yes.
And very well loved in her time.
Very well loved in her time. And I got a kick out of her, and I thought, I think I could be like Irma Bombeck. And that was what I thought this book, if I ever wrote one, might look like. And on the way to church on this one particular Sunday morning, I had just said again, I should write a book. Nobody will believe my life. And I didn't mean it in a good way. And we get to church and we go to Sunday school, and there's about 200 people in this Sunday school auditorium, so to speak. And Dan, our pastor, walks in. This is a group of, I would say, more young married couples, maybe with small children, like my husband and I had younger children at the time. And he came in and he goes, I've never had this happen before, but God distinctly told me whoever keeps talking about writing a book, they should just go ahead and do it. And my husband elbows me and says, I think that's you. And I didn't know then, but I found out years later that it was me that he was thinking about when he made that comment. And
this was John Maxwell.
No, this is our Sunday school teacher, okay, who his name is Dan Ryland, and actually he is an incredible pastor in his own right in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I've kept in touch with him, and some of the other pastors at that time, and just an exciting thing. So that planted the seed of actually writing a book. And so back then, to my defense, and why I didn't get one written for many, many years, was because I didn't know how. There was no self-publishing. There was no, like, I remember going to the library and getting a book, you know, like how to write a book. And I didn't even really, I had this concept of Irma Bombeck and funny stories that were like daily things that were happening with my girls and my husband. And then I got to thinking about it. I thought, well, some of this I really couldn't share. So maybe I don't need to write a book. You know how that mental thing kicks in. And so it actually took me something like 35 years to actually write my first book. And it is not the book that I would have written that was Irma Bombeck style. But it is the book that I believe God told me to write. And
The butterfly moments.
butterfly, it's called Create Butterfly Moments, Become the Person You Were Meant to Be. And it's funny because I learned so many things of what not to do in the process of writing that book. I did have a publisher helping me, or someone that I thought was a publisher. And that's like a whole teaching in itself, because it is, if I could just say this frankly, it can be, not always, but it can be a very predatory environment for people who want to write books. And I believe...
What do you mean by that?
I mean that there are people who call themselves publishers who aren't.
Oh.
There are, and there, you know, I mean, I don't mean to speak poorly of them. They serve a purpose. But I believe that there, in this world of publishing, that there are a lot of people who play on the emotions of somebody who wants to write a book. I mean, that is part of anything that we want to do, is finding people who can help us get it done. But I think the primary reason I went into this business is I felt like it was a calling.
Yeah.
But I also felt that what I bring to it is the truth. I don't want to write people's books with them or help them get their book into the marketplace without them fully knowing the truth. And I tried to be as frank as I possibly can about the experience, what you need to do to make it successful. And I think that is just so important, because not everybody will do that. Even those who are under the umbrella of doing good things, or even under faith-based publishing. And so I decided that when I went into this business, I would be truthful and talk to people about their book. What is the bigger picture? What is your marketing plan? All of those kinds of things, because a book is a business. And that's my first point, really, when I think about the mistakes that people make, is they don't treat it like a business. And
Would it be okay if I grab my pen?
of course,
Sorry.
yes, of course, yes.
Thank you. And then one more question. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Do not be worried. No.
Marge is coming in. Does she always sits here? Is it easiest for her?
No, she can sit anywhere.
Thanks.
Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry.
Well, and when back in the days when I was going to John Maxwell's church, he used to say something like this: I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference, doing something that makes a difference at a
Training
time.
the leaders, right?
Yes. I think he meant that in general, and definitely with leaders. But I took it as something that I embraced in my own life, because I personally wanted to make a difference with people who wanted to make a difference,
Right.
doing something that makes a difference at a time that makes a difference.
That's
And
the ripple effect that goes.
yes, yeah. In fact, the first time I heard him say that, he didn't say the second two lines. He only said the first two lines. But even then, it was very impactful. My soul just said, oh yeah, I want to make a difference in the world. Not in a way that I was looking for fame or fortune or any of those things. You just want to impact people. And
That sounds familiar too.
I think we do that through our stories. I heard the other day somebody say that our identity, we as people, and our identity is the sum total of the stories that we hold from within. And I thought, wow, that is really true, because we do have a lot of stories in our life. Some of them I think could be used beneficially to help others. Some of them I think sometimes need to be kept to ourselves, and I'm a firm believer in that when it comes to books and what we share about others, especially, you know, when it's part of our story but sometimes involves others. And I've had a few experiences like this where I really had to fetter out, okay, this is a journey. Book writing is a journey. What are we going to put into the world, and what are the ramifications of that? And you do have to consider all of those things when you're publishing something, especially. Now, if you're writing a book for yourself, which that is a reason why you might want to write a book, that is a little different than pushing the publish button and making it available to any and everyone. So I wanted to make a difference, and I knew this whole book thing was in my head for years and years. And I think for me, I've learned mostly from the mistakes I've made. And that's true in my day-to-day life. It's also true in my book journey life. I was so grateful for I'm going to put it in quotes, the success of Create Butterfly Moments. It was a book that was very dear to me. I was working with younger people at the time, and that book was, and still is, 27 aspects of a person's life that I believe you need to be successful in life. And it was by design. I do believe God was in every chapter, and I was in every chapter with him, kicking and screaming, saying, I really want to write it like this, and I want to do this. And he's like, yeah, no, not so much. Let's do it like this. And I listened and got frustrated at times and hired the publisher who really did not get me. And it was an experience for sure. And the success of that book, becoming #1 in 8 countries. It was #1 in all 9 categories that at the time you could have your book in 9 categories. It hit #1 in all of those categories as well. It was what most would think and be excited to have happen with their first book, which that's unusual. It's unusual. It is unusual. But I had done some things right. I'd also done some things wrong. So I think you fail forward and learn as you go.
That's good. Feel
Yeah.
forward.
Yes.
Well, at least you can put your hands up, right? If you fall backwards, you ain't got no protection.
Yeah. I heard Les Brown say one time, if you fall down, land on your back, because then there's only one way up. And I think that's probably true. So the mistake #1, I think that most people do make when it comes to a book is not knowing or understanding that your book is a business. And most people treat it more like a hobby. That's not to say that your book cannot be a hobby. It certainly can. But if you want success with your book, you have to treat it like a business. All businesses have basically 3 basic aspects of the business. You have the operations and fulfillment, which would be the inner workings of your business. You have sales and marketing, and that helps you with visibility. And you have the finances and accounting part, so you have to know your numbers. And when you look at business,
Can you repeat that?
Sales and marketing, that helps with your visibility. Your operations and product fulfillment, that is more about your customer and making sure that they're happy and get the product that they purchased. And then finances and accounting, and that's basically just knowing your numbers. And most people who write a book, they don't have a big business behind them. Some do. And it's interesting to me that I'm in the business world primarily. Almost every job I've ever had has been business related in some way. I've owned multiple businesses. Hi. How are you? Wonderful.
Are you okay? I will be.
As soon as you get sit it down, huh, and relaxed. Oh, that's nice. Oh. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we're happy you're here. So most people don't realize that a book's a business, and they treat it like a hobby, and it can be a hobby, but if you really want success, you do have to treat it as if it is a business. Even if it's a part-time business, it still is a business. So in the nonfiction world, which I can tell you I am most familiar with, there is a little more of a twist to this whole idea of a business, and that is that you have to know about your book in that what problem does your book solve? What problem does your book solve? Who are you solving the problem for? And what is the solution that you offer them? That is basic business, in that every business solves a problem of some sort.
This is nonfiction.
It is nonfiction, but it really applies to fiction work as well, because it's business, right? Even if your problem is to entertain your perfect reader, I call them a perfect fit reader, you have to know who your book is for. That is critical, and you should be writing your book to that person. And definitely this is true more of nonfiction maybe than fiction, but when your book is done, and say it's on Amazon, you have to know and call in that reader who you are hoping to make the impact with, or hoping that will read your book. It's just a critical part of the process. It also is that business mind that most people who are writing books are a little more creative than logical. Not always, because I get both. So they're really good at the creative part, but not so good at thinking of the book being something that's solving a problem for somebody, for example, especially if you talk about memoir. Memoir especially, people want to tell their story, and I truly believe it's a good thing. I've told many stories about my life, and I've also held some very close, not told them to many people, because I didn't feel like it was the right time to talk about certain things. But our stories are who we are, and they do make an impact. And when you think about your book as a business and these different aspects of business, for those of us that are people of faith, I think especially we need to focus on the purpose. And so mistake number 2, and as far as what I think of the mistakes that not only have I made, but I see other people making, is they don't have a plan and they don't have a purpose. So people of faith, I would say all of us share one purpose. And that one purpose that we share is to share the good news. I mean, if we are Christ followers, we have to keep that main purpose within our mind, no matter what we're doing. Now, will your book fit into that? It very likely may, especially if you've had a story and you want to deliver that story in such a way that it gives somebody hope or solutions to what they might be going through. So, for example, I've not written about grief, but I definitely could write about grief. Part of my story is having lost Jennifer, the young woman who is on the cover of my first book. I wrote it to honor her memory, but it's not a grief book, and it's not really even about her, which that also is a mistake, by the way. It worked out in my favor, but to tell you the truth, the cover of your book really needs to tie to the subject matter. But I was writing to somebody like her, a young person who was had big dreams and wanting to serve God in special ways. I was writing to her. And because of that, that's the vision I had for the cover. I felt like she needed to be on the cover. I commissioned a watercolor painting for the cover of my book. But the book's not about her. It's about a young person who's trying to figure out, what do you need to be successful in life? And I really believe that God was giving me principles to share within the context of this book. So our big person as Christ, or our big purpose as a Christ follower, I believe always has to be, and it should dictate what you do, is this sharing the good news? Is it giving somebody hope? Are we loving our readers? And those things are really critical to me and the people that I generally work with. Sometimes they don't always see the big purpose. They want to share their story, but they haven't quite evolved in how it could help show love to another person, and how they can deliver the hope. Because sometimes people that work with me haven't evolved all the way through their story. They want to share this story. They know that it could make an impact somehow. But in those instances, it actually is a little bit more about them wanting to share their story than the reader who they want to impact. And that's very... I think that that's just what we need to focus on. And if you haven't gotten through the process yet of what is my system for getting over whatever it is I've been through, that may be very traumatic, by the way, and hard to revisit, which I find many of the people that work with me find that their journey has been difficult, and it's hard to relive to get it on paper. I think that's one thing that I bring to the table different than others, is because I am a trained John Maxwell coach. And so I've kind of learned how to help people over these humps, if you will, to identify the deeper thing within their journey, and also, or the deeper purpose within their journey, and also to see what their story could do for someone else. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, really, hi, how are you? That really does need to be brought out in the book. Is, do you have a system? What is your vision of what happens? I always think of the Covey principles of keeping the end in mind for what you do. I can't remember exactly how he phrased that right now, but if you keep the end in mind when you're writing a book, when that reader closes the book, what is it that you want them to do with that information? Do you want them to share it with other people because you would like a tribe of people that are following your work? That may be one of the goals at the end of your book. Do you want to give hope? Do you want to share the good news? Do you want to do something beyond the book, which is in my arena, because I do work with a lot of speakers and coaches, and people who have a system or are working on a system or don't know the system yet, and I help them figure it out. What do you want them to do after the book? Because to me, I feel like if you've written a book and you don't have a way for that reader to connect with you and maybe even work with you further, you're almost doing a disservice, because you can lead them so far, but what if you could leave them a little bit further in the whole idea of transformation? So those are two of the mistakes that I see happening a lot. And I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit. I was thinking of a couple, as what happens to me a lot. Even when I was writing Create Butterfly Moments, I would have scripture verse after scripture verse that would pop into my head. And that was part of the struggle I had writing that book, because I wanted it full of scripture verses. And, we could even make this a Bible study if we wanted to. And we could do so much. And I saw it different ways. And the Lord just kept saying, no, not yet. No, we don't want that in there. No, not like that. And I was like, but this is me. I wanted it to be a representative, representation of who I am and where I was in life. And it just was not his plan. So so verses come to my mind a lot, and I thought I would share this one. It's from Psalm 24. May he give you the desires of your heart and make all of your plans succeed. And when you think of how do you make your plans succeed, there are a lot of ways to make your plans succeed. He makes them succeed initially, or all the time, even to the end. However, I think that there are other things that people need to help their plans succeed. And I just thought of another. I'm a storyteller, and it's really hard for me not to tell all my stories and just teach. But I think you remember the points when you do share stories, and I think that is another really good thing when you're sharing your story, to share it fully and help people anchor some of the ideas that you want to teach them through your book. So the story that just popped into my mind was when my youngest daughter was little. I had a hard time keeping her in bed. I don't know if you guys have had this trouble, but they
Always. Continuously.
Yes, they have to go to the bathroom. Right. They need one more kiss, mommy. Oh, I need whatever. And you pray with them and say, oh, let's stay in bed, honey. And try to get them to the point where they can go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time, Jennifer, after I was really frustrated and probably had said I should write a book, no one would believe my life, because I could see humor in this whole situation where of her popping up all the time, because my other daughter really didn't do it as much. She kind of was like, oh, it's bedtime, okay, let's read a story and go to sleep. But out of exasperation, I was like, okay, honey, let's pray one more time. And if you decide that you can't quite get to sleep, I really want you to pray and ask God to help you fall asleep, and he will. I was trying to really do my best as a parent to impress upon her how important sleep was and prayer was and relying on God. It's like it gets so intense sometimes. And so I'm back in the other room, and she pops up again, and I'm like, well, honey, what happened? Why are you here? And she said, well, Mommy, I just needed somebody with skin on this time. And so sometimes to get our books done, I think we do need people with skin on, because we hope, it's true. We hope God will bless our work and help it take flight into the world. But I do believe we need people to help us that are strategically a part of our project. And so we do have to have a plan. We do have to have a purpose. And along with the purpose, I talked about being a Christ follower, and the big purpose of what we all do all the time is, serving God and wanting to share the hope and glory, the good news, and love. We want to love those readers that we envision reading our book. And that was a mistake I really kind of made with my first book, is I never really had a big vision after I wrote it. I didn't have a plan of what to do with it after I wrote it. I thought I might use it with the youth that I was working with at the time. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll come up with an online course, because that's a good idea. But I never really put any of that into place. And it's funny, recently I feel this nudging again that God really wants me to do something like that. And so we'll see how that pans out as I look at the things that I'm doing in the future to serve people that want to write books, but also kids, because I think our world, especially with the youth, are very misdirected these days, and it hurts my heart to think about it. So I didn't really know exactly who my book was for, and I didn't really have a written plan per se. I did have an outline, so in my favor, that part was good. I knew what I I had a theme, and I kind of knew what it was supposed to look like when I got it done. I thought I did with what I didn't know. I thought I knew. So we write books for different reasons. I think sometimes we write books for the therapeutic value. And in the case of some of what I've written, it did have therapeutic value. I'm a journaler. I've learned God speaks to me through journaling. I don't even always know what's coming out. It's like, whoa, that wasn't me, I don't think. You know, where did that come from? And I think God speaks to us in a lot of different ways. It can be a very healing journey and can be therapeutic. I don't feel that everything we write should be in a book for the world to read, especially if it's going to harm somebody and land you in court, more specifically. I did have a case that was similar to that. When she first came to me to write her book, I did not know the element of where she was going with it. I don't think she did either, honestly, and it just sort of started happening. And as she was sharing the story with me, I was like, number one, do your children know this story? You're going to publish a book and you don't want it out into the world without them knowing what you're writing about. So number one, you really need to talk to them about this and make sure that this is something that they're aware of and they're okay with you writing this and publishing it. It's okay to write anything you want to write. It has great value, I think, to work through some of the things that we go through in life. Whether you publish it or not is a whole nother thing. And it's interesting because I also told her I wanted her to consult with an attorney. Because when you're putting somebody else, like the dirty laundry out that includes somebody else, that can really end you up in a lot of hot water. And just changing their name is not going to protect you. If people know you've been married twice and your first husband is the father of your children and you're describing things that happen during that time, it does not take rocket science to figure out who that person is. So you do have to really consult legal authority and have yourself protected before you start writing something like that. In fact, I would go so far, me personally, if I ever do write about some of the aspects of my life that involve other people who are still living, I would definitely get that person's permission, which in my case would probably never happen. So I may never write about some of the things that have happened in my life. Other times we write to change, let me put it this way. We write to share our legacy with our family and friends. Those books are not published. They might just be to leave your legacy, to leave your history for your children, for your children's children, and those that aren't even in the world yet. I tell a story oftentimes about the pictures that are on my bedroom wall. I have one of my maternal grandmother. I never met her. My mom barely remembered her. She died when my mom was 5. And I look at that picture and I think, I'm kind of like her. She's barefoot, and I like to be barefoot. But what else do I have in common with her? And I just don't know. I know nothing about her. And then I have my paternal grandmother, whom I knew quite well until I was 12 and have wonderful memories of her. I still don't know a lot about her life, but I know the love she had for me. And if she had written anything, I think I would know more about her story. I learned some of it through my dad. And I have a picture of me holding my first grandbaby. And I think, wow, I don't want to be that person that didn't leave the legacy. I didn't necessarily want to publish it at first. I was kind of toying with the idea of what to do. But then I thought, if Grammy got hit by a bus, maybe it'd be good for them to know these things that I think. So I decided to go ahead and write it, not just for my family, but to release it into the world. So I think we can write things therapeutically to work through some of the trauma that we've been through. And if you do have trauma in your life and you're going to write about it, you will have to revisit those times. And and you might even want to have, a prayerful person with you, or that is going to support you through that process, maybe a therapist or a close confidant, so to speak, that, I know for me, I went through different phases of my journaling experience of the trauma in my life. And it was good to have people surrounding me that when I had those days of feeling down, that they could help me get back up. Those things I think are really important. One of the other mistakes that I see in people that write books is not fully understanding the different viewpoints of the people or touch points that your book should go through. So initially you're writing your story. It's from your point of view. It should possibly, I highly recommend it go through an editor so that it becomes a reader's point of view rather than your story about you. Now you're going to pull the reader in, and that developmental part of editing can really help make that reader oriented. But you also have to think about, as you're telling your story, the reader themselves. And I already mentioned, what do you want them to do when they finish your book? Is it a feel-good book? Like my first idea of just humorous, snippets of my life and how crazy my life was, it would have been humorous. It would have been uplifting and given hope. And when they closed the book, what would I have wanted them to do? Maybe share it with somebody else, or share some of the stories and uplift others in their life. That would be a good purpose, I think, for that book, that type of book even. But is there more? Is there more that you want to do with your book? And not really fully understanding who the reader is, and switching from it's my story to it's my story to help you. That's the progression you have to go through when you're writing. It's critical to the success of your book. I would say it'll sit on the shelf if it's all about you and you haven't pulled in how to give hope to somebody else or to share God's love. For us that are faith-based writers, I think that's a primary part of writing. I think the other thing, another mistake people make is not really understanding that there's going to be a sacrifice. When you start writing a book, you are going to sacrifice time that you might spend on something else. You're going to sacrifice some aspect of your financial pocketbook, so to speak. At a minimum, if you are writing a memoir-based book, and you're working with a tight budget, you definitely need somebody to create a cover for you. Because if somebody who is looking for an inspirational book, or a book that is memoir-driven or has some kind of component to that, where you're helping somebody else, if they never get past the cover, they will never read the book. That's the truth. That's the bottom line truth. So there are many cover designers that are not that expensive, but you need to find one that matches your genre of books. So you do your research and figure out what that is. I don't recommend you putting your daughter's picture on the front, although it happened to have worked for me. That was probably not a great decision. But I never planned to write another book, and I never really thought it would amount to anything. I had hoped, I hoped God would let me use it. I hoped it would impact lives, but I never really had that bigger vision of it being something special. I know that sounds really weird, like why would you waste all that time? But I guess I just didn't have the confidence or the wherewithal to think that big. I also think that if you are in the book business, you have to look at that. We talked about the book being a business. You have to look at the numbers. And for me, and what I do to help others is often tie other things to the book. So one of the biggest disappointments I had with my first book was I didn't know how I could connect to the reader. It launched, it went to, 8 countries, and it was in 9 categories. The number one, for all intents and purposes, it seemed like a big deal. But I didn't know who bought it. I mean, people that told me they bought it, I trusted that they probably did, but I didn't really know how to know that. I do remember speaking at an event after my book launched, and a lady came running up to me with my book in hand and almost jumped into my arms saying that I had changed her life. Well, that was incredible. And I remembered thinking, well, see, I always said if I could just impact one person, well, I guess she was my one. Oh, I'm done now. I don't recommend you say that. And I don't recommend you have that small kind of thinking. If you're going to write a book, write it to impact the world, unless it is just for your family. That was an incredible experience, and I think about it a lot of how she just kept talking about, she was telling me about my book. I thought, this is pretty cool. And I signed it for her, and she went on her merry way, and it was just a beautiful experience. And I've had other experiences like that, but that was the first one that really made me realize this book's going to change people's lives. And I didn't know what she looked like when I wrote it. And
is that what you, excuse me, is that what you mean by look at the numbers?
well,
The sales.
no.
You're thinking of sales.
Yes and no. Don't be minimal when you're writing. Think of who that perfect fit reader is. In fact, I have a little worksheet for you to work through that. But what I mean by know your numbers is you can use a book in your business. It can be your business. But if you really look at book sales per se, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. They're speakers, they're trainers, they're coaches, and sometimes they have product-based type things or service-based businesses. Say for even a beginning coach, maybe they are making $500 an hour in their coaching business. If they write a book and they sell a book for $20 even, most books would not sell much for $20, but say it did and people bought it. You have to sell a lot of books to make that $500. But if you get one client to coach, that's a easier way to make money if you're wanting to make money with your book, other than just, like getting your return on your investment. It's a smarter way to think of what can I do with people that I could monetize after my book is done. Or you need to be in the business of promoting that book nonstop, because it takes a lot of $20 books to get your return on investment, even if you're just thinking about your time, unless it's a hobby, and that isn't important to you. So you really do need to know the numbers of your business. I would not think like I thought, where I just wanted one person to impact. I wanted to impact kids specifically. I've given thousands of my book away to Student of the Months kids that I love doing that, or youth groups. I'll be invited to speak, and I talk to them about different topics, and I'll give books away for that. For me, I would love to say I've made millions of dollars on my book like John Maxwell says, but even John Maxwell, it took him 7 tries to get to the book that made him famous. So you have to realize too that it's a skill set. Writing and publishing books is a skill set. In fact, it's many skills that take from start to finish, if you think about that. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, because I really do believe that you can use your book in so many ways that will impact the world. but selling book one by one with nothing beyond that, that's a hard way to have a business with your book. If your book is being used like in the faith world, maybe you want to do like a Bible study out of the lessons you've learned. I'm in Lisa Turquist's group, Compel, and I have to tell you, listening to her views on writing and publishing and thinking through the process of how she has become who she is today to impact women in the way she has, being truthful and honest with her stories of very impactful, raw stories. It's incredible. Her impact is huge. Those books are used in Bible studies. They are used in other ways. So selling multiple copies of your book to one entity is a really great way to think about your book as a business also, and impacting.
Lisa, what do you mean by coach? That we need a coach to sell more than just for one person? You use the word coaching or coach.
What I was saying was if you coach the person beyond the book. So here's an example of that. In fact, Lisa Turquist, I think, does some of this in some ways. Say your book is about, who has a topic that they're writing about? Or do you mind sharing a topic that you want to?
Mine's about child abuse.
Wonderful. Not that that's wonderful, because that's horrid. But who do you want to impact with that story?
People who have suffered and not gotten any help.
Yes. I helped Jackie write a book. Her book, the name of it is, it's coming to me, What Was Meant for Evil. And she has a horrific story of being abused in, I think, 14 foster homes in her childhood. And she uses that book to teach a Bible study. She's also been on Holy Spirit Broadcasting with just serving Christians based on a lot of things, but her view. So when you think about a book like that and serving that person that needs healing, how else could you help them heal? Coaching, for one way, is not therapy. They probably need some therapy when it comes to coming to terms with what's happened in a childhood. I have had abuse in my childhood as well, and so I have not written about it. I could, but I haven't. I'd more like to write about how it impacted me in my adult life, because that's a story in itself. And why I married my first husband and why that was so crazy. You know, I mean, I could really write about that easily, and it would probably change a lot of lives. I don't feel comfortable doing it. I don't feel comfortable doing it. Not because I wouldn't want to help people, but it involves somebody else's story. And it involves a bigger story than just my story. And how could I tell my part without telling his part? And it's very confusing to me, so I've just let it sit there. But how else then could you help the people? So when you wrote about helping people through this childhood experiences that they've had, your book, would it walk them through steps to heal?
Towards the end,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Perfect. And when they got to the end, what would you hope that they would do next?
They would be enlightened and have hope from my story that they're not alone.
Yes, that's beautiful. And what if you could get to know them better and help them
So
with...
maybe put resources in the back.
You could. You could also put you as a resource in the back. You could have an online program that would walk them through it with you if you felt equipped to do that. Not everybody does feel equipped to do that, but coaching does that. So being a certified coach, I'm working with people who are certified coaches. They are looking for people who want a better future, and many of which have things that they need to come to terms with in their past. Not therapeutically, it's not therapy at all, but it is coaching. And it's a fascinating way to make an impact. So sometimes coaches who are trained coaches, they want to tell their story, and when the book is finished, they then point them to the direction of some things that they could do online. One of which, you could create a Facebook group if you're into social media at all. So your Facebook group, then you could do just like here, doing Facebook Lives to help them. You could create some programs where they work with you over a period of maybe 90 days, and you look at each aspect of your healing journey and find out, okay, where was the system of how I healed?
The system.
The system of how you heal. And sometimes people don't see that system. When I worked with Susie, she didn't see that system at all. In fact, she worked with me for over a year, and I didn't feel like her book was ready until we really had something to offer that reader who felt connected to her. It's like, but what's next? You know, what's your system to help somebody walk through how you've walked through this journey? And so it's been interesting. Now we finally found the system, which was really inspirational when you think about it. I kept asking her, but like, how did you get to where you are today? You know, and she would have little insights. And then one day she was at church and the pastor was preaching a message, and she's like, well, it's really funny you should ask, because she kind of riddled off this thing, which was her interpretation of what the pastor had been talking about that Sunday at church. And I was like, you mean you do this, this, and this? And she was like, yeah. And I go, well, that's it. That's your system. And so we wrote about that towards the end of the book to give people inspiration as to how to heal and then to look for her. And so you can create Facebook groups to help people. I know one lady, she's not related to me, but I found her group helpful when I lost my daughter. Parents who've lost children have kind of a uniqueness about them. And I think it's very helpful to know these things. Am I taking too much time? Oh, good. I think it's helpful to be able to serve a population with your story. I personally have not written about grief either. I do bring a little of it into Butterfly Moments, just because I believe that is something that will impact everybody, no matter. At some point in time, you're going to have some kind of loss and grief. But I didn't talk about it specifically with my journey through grief and how it impacted me and my family. But it's in my mind to do one of these days. So the mistakes, I'll just recap really quick, because I really value your time, and I want you to learn from the mistakes of the things that I see from people. The first one is that not really knowing your numbers, not really seeing your book as a business. And of course, you can talk to your accountant about whether or not some of your expenses are tax write-offs or not. I've had a lot of fun with the IRS with a whole nother business that they deemed was a hobby, even though we had spent a lot of money trying to get it off the ground. One of those other sort of business failures, so to speak, that I've learned from. So you do need to talk to your accountant and make sure that you fully understand what is and isn't allowed based on all of the legal things that have to do with your book. But if it is going to be a business, and I honestly think that is a good thing to think about, unless you're writing for your family and your legacy, then some of that wouldn't apply as much. Also, making sure that your book is reader oriented I can tell within usually the first chapter of whether or not the book is reader oriented, in fact, usually the first few lines, whether a book is reader oriented or the author's orientation, because you do want to pull in the reader right away with your story. Not having an actual plan of what to do with your book to get it done, and what to do with your book to publish it, what you need to do with your book to keep it afloat, and actually use it after it's published, how to promote it, whether you're going to use ads, whether you, I know with my first book, I got very good advice from someone who said to write down a list of supporters. And that to me was one of the best things I could have ever done, is just start making a list of people who would support my book when it got done. And it was kind of funny because my first book, I wanted to launch it on a particular day, and I thought we were on the same page and we were going to launch it on that day, and I'd sent out emails to my list of supporters and told them this is like what's happening, and they were all excited, and it didn't actually get published for another year after that. And so I kept sending more emails saying, well, that date didn't work out, we're doing this, and people were following along, having a good time. It was all good. It was good. God's timing's not always our own, and it all worked out to my favor because the longer it took, the more people started following, and it actually worked pretty good. But I kept a page on my kitchen counter, and every time I'd meet somebody or think of somebody that might support that book, I wrote that name down and how I could contact them. Was it somebody I met on Facebook? Was it somebody I met in a group like this? Do I have their phone number? Do I know their email? Do I know how to reach them on Messenger or some other way? And I kept a list. To get that success on launch day, I had 250 people on my list.
That's great.
Yeah. You could do it too. I'm not anybody special. There's nothing different about me than there would be you. It's just a matter of being that aware to write your list down. And when you are making it that awareness and you're talking to people in the store I don't know, I had so many random people say, I want your book when it gets done. See? Yeah, I see the nudging. I see the nudging.
Sorry, my elbow just.
I had one of those nudgers back in the day.
Spasm.
Yeah, there's a little spasm here. Like.
Well,
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What is the criteria to be on that list?
Well, it's funny you should ask. And you want the truth?
Yes,
Okay. Here's the truth.
even if it hurts.
Well, it won't hurt. In
Okay.
fact, it'll make you happy, actually. And if you're talking, I'm going to tell you what I know about the Amazon bestseller list, because I deal mostly with Amazon. Authors that want their book on Amazon. And why not? That's where most books are purchased. So if you're going to take your message to the world, I recommend Amazon, even though there are other ways to sell books, many other ways. That's an easy way for most, especially first-time authors. So on Amazon, they go by categories. Each book is allowed 3 categories now. Back in the day, you were only allowed 2. At the time I published Butterfly Moments, you could only have 2 categories, but after the book was published, you could add 8 more. So each book had up to 8 categories. They don't do that anymore. So each book has 3 categories now from the beginning. And I imagine that saved them a lot of manpower in that addition, adding extra categories to a book, because that's kind of crazy. So each book has 3 categories. You can have different categories for different formats of your book. So say you have an ebook, a paperback book, and a hardback book. You might even have an audio book. I don't do audiobooks, but you could have one. So you could have 3 categories for each one, but please, please, please be ethical and pick categories that match your book. The thing I see, which is very disingenuous, is there are people in this business that will promise your book to be a bestseller, and they're putting, I had one lady that I was following, she asked if I would help with this book launch, and I thought, yeah, sure, I'll help you guys. And I took a look, and she had it in coin collecting, and this book had nothing to do with coin collecting. And I'm thinking, no, we're not doing that. Mm-mm. That is a trick of the trade, if you will. It's also...
They put it in a popular category to make you...
No, they put it in a small category so that you don't need many books to become a bestseller in coin collecting. I mean, people don't really publish.
The opposite.
But let me tell you how that does not work for you. It might get you instant fame on the bestseller. You know, you can do a screenshot of your bestseller and all of that stuff, and that's hunky-dory. It's the truth. Your book will be a bestseller in coin collecting, but that won't help you find your ideal perfect fit readers. And so when you are looking to have your book find people you don't know, you want it to lift up by doing the right things with God's help. Because it does take God's help, I think, to create all of the perfect storm, if you will, to create a book. But there are categories that are drilled down. So the way I do publishing for people is I look for broad categories and very niche categories. I just did one, I think it was in March, was the last one that I published. I hope I'm not misspeaking. It was Good Friday, in fact, and it was so cool to see her book. She's part of the John Maxwell team. So to see her book next to John Maxwell's book was pretty impressive to me. I was very, very excited for her. So her book was number 2 next to John Maxwell was 1. She was book number 2 in the bestseller list. And this was for church leadership, was her topic. And number 3 was the Pope. And I don't know about you, but we were pretty excited about that ranking. And it was pretty darn special. And I was so happy for her. Her book was number 1 in, I think, Christian living and grief, because her book was a book about grief as well. Kind of was church leadership and grief and leadership in general. So I do research to figure out what the best categories are. And I also do my due diligence with some tools that I have to see how many books do you need to sell in that category to hit that number 1 list. And
Can I ask a question? In that particular thing, can it be changed? Because I think they accidentally put it in a category for my book that I'm like, as I'm looking at the categories, I'm like, that's not describing my book at all. I thought maybe because feedback or readers or Amazon or Facebook or something decided to pick their own categories for it, and I'm like, it's definitely not about parenting. Not at all.
I had a horrible experience with one of my books. It launched in October, and they put it in the occult. And I almost had a heart attack. Literally, I almost had a heart attack.
So they do it on...
They do sometimes put a book in a category. That was back in the day when you had more categories, and all I can say is it made me want to be sick, because my book was nothing like that. But because it was around Halloween, somebody in their wisdom that wasn't very wise put it in that category, and like I say, I was very upset about it. So categories can be changed.
Okay.
Typically, and your scenario is not unlike others. You want it in the right categories so that it attracts the right readers. Your keywords can be key phrases. They need to be spot on with, and one simple way to look for those is to start typing in the search what you think your reader would be looking for if they were looking for a book like yours.
Okay.
So that's one way to look for keywords. There are some other research tools that I use to kind of dial those in. Like say if you're like with Mindy's book had to do with a lot of things. Keyword wise, it had to do with leadership. It had to do with the death of the leader, the pastor, the head pastor of the church. It had to do with that. It had to do with a lot of different things. So we strategically looked at the keywords to match things that I believed would be things people would search, and it will populate for you. So if you start typing in a grief book, for example, and put in grief, it's going to list a lot of things that people might search under that main area of grief. And so you keep looking to see what people are looking for, and you want to make sure that you're where they're looking.
Laurie, may I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So how do you find these keywords again?
You start typing in the Amazon under books.
Yeah,
So you go to Amazon like you're going to make a purchase.
yeah,
You click on the books for the search bar,
yeah.
and then start typing the words that you think somebody would put in that search bar if they were looking for a book like yours.
I see.
So if it was a grief
But wouldn't
book,
that just give me a list of books that have already been written on the subject?
it will give you a list of things people are searching. So as you start to type, it's gonna give you
Like a drop down.
in that drop down. It will start populating and give you options. That's one way to do it. There's many ways to do it, but the easy way, without paying somebody to research it for you, that's one way to do it. And a lot of people think that the keywords are one word. You can use a phrase, and that may help you. I also highly recommend that your title and subtitle really point the person to what you're doing. There can be those same keywords. Like if I was going to write a book on grief, I'd probably have grief in the title or the subtitle, because it just makes sense. That's what people are looking for. If I was going to write about, the death of a child, because that would be what I could talk about. Well, I could talk about a lot of grief, but specifically, I feel like I'm an expert in that subject, unfortunately. If I put death of child, it's going to give me some other options to look at, that maybe things that
Thank you.
people would be searching out. What else were we talking about?
We were talking about your list of mistakes not
The
to
mistakes not to make. That is one of the mistakes, is people will put the wrong keywords in, and then they don't know the numbers because they're not watching the reporting on Amazon. So Amazon does have reporting. So look to see what's working and what's not. If you have a bad category, definitely change it. Don't get change happy though, because it takes time for those changes to make sense and to actually make a difference.
Okay.
And drive traffic to your book. You need to be telling people. I create annual marketing plans for people, maybe getting on podcasts or doing, Facebook stuff, developing that group that are all like-minded people that have struggled with that same issue, like maybe child abuse. There are probably many of them already on Facebook, and you can cross-pollinate, which is what I call cross-pollinate, to help get people seeing what you're doing. It is networking.
Can I just say something that comes to mind?
Yes.
I just heard about a ministry for foster kids that they're giving suitcases.
Yes, there's
Did you hear
quite a
about
few there's quite a few that do that.
And a teddy bear, and it would be so cool, like to have a book
Yes.
in the suitcase.
It sure would.
Wouldn't that be neat?
Yes,
It's just a thought.
sure would. In fact, I even know of a person that wrote a children's book all about, or she was a foster mom. And so her book is about a little bug that's looking for its mom. And it's looking for its mom that looks just like him, and he can't find his mom. And eventually realizes that his mom was there all along, because it wasn't that his mom needed to look like him, but his mom needed to love him and take care of him. And so that's like the purpose behind that book. in fact, I have another one that I'm working on right now with an author. It's really sweet. I love this book. I love all the books I work with. She's her story is about an orphanage, and it's about a little girl who loses her parents and goes to live with her grandmother, and then the grandmother passes away, which is not fun at all. But she goes to this orphanage and meets these other little girls, and they have these little escapades, and it's really sweet. So a book like that would be really cool to put in the suitcase. But yeah, most foster kids, they get a trash bag, and it makes them feel like they're just trash.
Yeah,
That's
no
horrible.
Dignity.
No
So
dignity at all.
God put that on my heart
Yes.
just recently. When I heard of it, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
that's perfect.
I've given to some nonprofits that's what they do. Yes, there's so many, and that can be the purpose of your book, is to bring awareness to things like that,
Yeah.
and give a list of people who serve the population that you want to impact, and then go speak to them. Tell them your story or the stories that you want to share based on that. There are people looking for speakers all over the place. I was just in Niagara, Canada, and my message is always the same, is that your message matters. I have a live stream show every Monday at 10 a.m. and I talk about nonfiction books. I interview authors, and I love what I do to help people get their message into the world, because I don't feel like anything happens to us that is just for us. I've come to the conclusion that a lot of stuff happens to a lot of people, and you can use that story, maybe not publicly. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should be out talking about things, but if you're called to do that, and you're called to write about it, you may also be called to speak to places that need to hear your story. I'm sorry. I really, truly believe that with all my heart.
I promise no tissue this time.
It's a process. And I wanted to make sure I told you all my mistakes here.
Well, that's exactly what she writes about, is our life story. We've been together 28 years.
Nice.
22 years married this year. This
Beautiful.
month.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah, that's a
Thanks.
beautiful thing.
It's amazing.
Is there any other questions that people might have that I could help you with?
I came in late, so I'm not even sure.
What the mistakes were?
No, well.
Do we want to
I
end
just-
Facebook Live? Are you?
We can.
Did you
I
cover
know that
your?
you have something to do today after, right?
Just so did you finish your?
I finished that.
Okay.
However, I did, in case anybody wants and I can make them available on Facebook too.
Yeah.
I did bring just a couple of worksheets to
You
help.
can do that. We're just going to end this.
Okay.
Oh,
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you so much.